If you've been doing crossword puzzles to keep your brain sharp, that's not a bad instinct. But according to the research, it's probably not doing what you think it is. What neurologists actually point to is a different category of exercise entirely. 10 of them. Some look nothing like what most people picture when they hear the phrase brain exercise. Crosswords, word searches, Sudoku, these activate pathways that already exist in your brain. You're practicing what you already know, and the brain doesn't grow from repetition. It grows from novelty, from struggle, from being asked to do something it has never done before. The ones that feel hardest, the ones most people avoid because they're uncomfortable, turn out to be the ones that matter most. So here's what we're going to cover. All 10. For each one, I'll tell you what it's actually doing in the brain, the mechanism, not just the advice, and how to start it today, without buying anything or signing up for anything. Most of these cost nothing. A few will just cost you some discomfort. That discomfort, it turns out, is exactly the point. The brain loses roughly 5% of its volume every decade after the age of 40. After 60, that rate accelerates. The regions that go first are the ones governing memory, processing speed, and executive function, the ability to plan, switch between tasks, and make decisions under pressure. That's not a scare tactic. That's just anatomy. But there's a distinction that changes everything, one that most of the popular advice around brain health completely misses. There are two different things you can do with that information. You can try to slow the loss, or you can build reserve, and those are not the same thing. Cognitive reserve is the brain's capacity to absorb damage and keep functioning. Think of it as extra circuitry, backup routes the brain can reroute through when the primary ones start to degrade. People with high cognitive reserve can have significant age-related changes in their brain tissue and still function sharply. People with low reserve lose function much faster because there's no redundancy to fall back on. The single most powerful thing you can do to build that reserve is force your brain to construct new pathways, not reinforce old ones, build new ones. That only happens through genuine novelty, through experiences the brain has never processed before, that require it to make connections it didn't previously have. This is why crosswords don't do the job. By the time you've done 100 of them, the brain has already mapped that territory. What looks like challenge is mostly retrieval from existing memory. It's the mental equivalent of taking the same walk every day. Comfortable, familiar, not building anything. I think about what gradual cognitive decline actually looks like in daily life, before it has a name, before anyone has labeled it. It's sitting at a dinner table with people you love and losing the thread of the conversation somewhere in the middle. Everyone's laughing and you're not quite sure at what. It's reading the same paragraph 3 times and still not being able to hold it. It's standing in a grocery store you've shopped at for 20 years and feeling, just for a moment, genuinely turned around. It's not being sure, really sure, whether you took your medication this morning or whether that was yesterday. None of those things announce themselves. They just start happening, quietly, and the people experiencing them often spend months, sometimes years, not telling anyone, because they're not sure if it's real, or if they're overreacting, or because they're frightened of what it might mean. That's the version of independence that's actually at stake here, not just the physical kind, the cognitive kind, the ability to follow what's happening around you, to remember what matters, to trust your own mind. This trajectory is not fixed. The brain retains the capacity to build new connections throughout life. The exercises we're about to go through work precisely because of that. They don't reverse what's happened, but they build the reserve that determines how much runway you have left and how long you stay sharp on it. And that's exactly what separates these 10 exercises from the ones most people are already doing. Let's get into them. I hear a version of the same thing fairly often. Someone has been doing daily crosswords for years, proud of the habit, consistent with it, and then something prompts them to try something genuinely new. A grandchild is learning guitar and they pick it up out of curiosity. They start a beginner Spanish app on a whim, and within a few weeks they notice something, not just that the new thing is hard, but that their mind feels more awake in a way it hasn't in a long time. More alert, more present. That's not a coincidence. That's the difference between retrieval and construction. Exercise 1. Learn a musical instrument. A study published in Frontiers in Psychology found that musical training in older adults was directly associated with greater volume in the parts of the brain governing memory, executive function, and language. Not maintained volume, greater volume. In a population where brain tissue is typically shrinking. The reason is that playing an instrument demands simultaneous engagement across multiple brain systems at once. Motor control, auditory processing, reading notation, emotional response, memory retrieval. The brain has to build new infrastructure to manage all of it at the same time. That's exactly the kind of demand that triggers new pathway growth. You don't need to become a musician, you need to become a beginner. Seniors with no prior musical experience improved their verbal memory after just 3 months of learning an instrument. 3 months. The instrument matters less than the challenge. Pick something that genuinely interests you. Ukulele, keyboard, harmonica. If it feels too easy inside of a month, you've chosen something too simple. Exercise 2. Learn a new language. Few activities challenge the brain as comprehensively as learning a new language. It demands working memory, pattern recognition, and sound discrimination, then requires real-time retrieval across all of them simultaneously. Research on older adults specifically, adults aged 59 to 79, found measurable structural changes in the brain regions governing working memory, attention, and cognitive control after just 4 months of language learning sessions. The starting point does not have to be ambitious. 15 minutes a day on a free app, a beginner's workbook from the library, 1 new word written by hand in a notebook each morning. The brain doesn't require fluency to benefit. It requires the ongoing experience of being genuinely out of its depth. That's the stimulus. Exercise 3. Read aloud. Every day. Simpler than most people expect and more powerful than it looks. Reading silently is a passive retrieval process. Reading aloud adds a motor component, an auditory feedback loop, and forces the brain to process language at a controlled pace, which means it can't skim or skip. You are engaging more of the brain for every sentence. A structured brain health program studied in older adult populations used reading aloud combined with handwriting and simple arithmetic as its 3 core activities. The target, stimulating the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for working memory, decision-making, and cognitive flexibility. Participants showed meaningful improvements across multiple cognitive measures. The exercises were not complicated, they were just deliberate. Pick something worth reading aloud. A short news article, a passage from a book, a poem, 10 minutes. The handwriting component matters too. Write a few sentences by hand after you've read, not typed. Handwriting recruits fine motor control and spatial reasoning in ways that typing simply doesn't. Exercise 4. Deliberate memorization. The brain's memory systems, specifically the hippocampus, which is one of the first regions affected by age-related decline, strengthen in direct proportion to how much they're used for active encoding, not passive exposure, active encoding. There's a meaningful difference between reading something and deciding to remember it. Choose something worth memorizing. A poem, a short passage, the capitals of 10 countries, the names of the people you'll see at an upcoming gathering, reviewed the night before. The mechanism that matters is the act of trying to recall something you've stored, getting it wrong, correcting yourself, and trying again. That cycle of struggle and correction is what builds the retrieval pathway stronger each time. Start with something short enough to memorize in a week, then move to something slightly harder. The difficulty gradient is the whole point. Exercise 5. Have real conversations. Deliberately sounds too simple. It isn't. Social conversation is one of the most cognitively demanding activities a human brain performs. Think about what's actually happening when you sit across from someone and talk. You're processing language in real time, retrieving memories to contribute, reading facial expressions and emotional cues, regulating your own responses, tracking the thread of what was said 3 exchanges ago, while formulating your next thought. No puzzle app comes close to that cognitive load, not even the expensive ones. The research backs this up in numbers that are hard to ignore. A study out of Rush University followed nearly 2,000 dementia-free older adults over more than 6 years. The most socially active participants were 38% less likely to develop dementia than the least socially active, and they stayed dementia-free an average of 5 years longer. 5 years, not from a drug, from staying socially engaged. The cluster connection matters here too. Social isolation is its own independent risk factor for cognitive decline, running through a completely different pathway than the exercises we've covered so far. Loneliness triggers a chronic low-grade stress response that damages the hippocampus directly. Getting out and talking to people isn't just good for morale, it's physically protective of brain tissue. The starting point, one genuine conversation per day that goes deeper than logistics. Not, did you see the game, but something that requires you to retrieve a memory, form an opinion, or explain something you know. A phone call, a coffee, a neighbor you've been meaning to catch up with. A conversation that challenges you is a conversation that's working. Exercise 6. Dance. Or do something that moves your body and your mind at the same time. Covers two problems simultaneously, and that's exactly why it works so well. The brain builds its strongest new pathways when it has to coordinate multiple demands at once. Dual-task activities, physical movement combined with cognitive challenge, produce more robust pathway growth than either type of activity done alone. Dancing is the most studied version of this because it combines learning movement sequences, responding to music, timing, spatial awareness, and social coordination, all running at once. And this connects to something we covered earlier, the brain systems governing coordination and stability, the same ones that determine whether you catch yourself when you stumble. Dancing specifically trains those systems. It's not just a brain exercise, it's a balance exercise. And for this age group, the two overlap more than most people realize. You don't need a class. Put on music you don't know well and move to it. Learn a simple line dance from a video. The unfamiliar rhythm and the unfamiliar sequence are what trigger the response. Once it becomes automatic, it stops being exercise. Change the song, change the style, keep it slightly outside your comfort zone. Exercise 7. Put the GPS away. Most people will resist this one. Resist the resistance. Spatial navigation is a primary function of the hippocampus. When you orient yourself in space, build a mental map of a new environment, or find your way back from somewhere unfamiliar, you are directly exercising one of the brain's most age-sensitive regions. Studies on London taxi drivers, who are required to memorize the entire city before licensing, showed that their hippocampus was measurably larger than non-drivers. It grew in direct proportion to the navigational demand placed on it. GPS has quietly removed nearly all of that demand from daily life. When a device tells you when to turn, your hippocampus doesn't engage. It's being bypassed, not exercised. And like any system that goes unused, it declines faster for the lack of it. The practice is deliberate. Drive a familiar route without guidance and notice what you actually know versus what you've been outsourcing. Take a new walking route through your neighborhood and try to reconstruct it from memory afterward. Visit somewhere new and spend 10 minutes building a mental map before reaching for your phone. None of this requires getting lost. It requires paying attention to where you are, which is something the brain used to do constantly and is now largely out of practice. Exercise 8. Use a structured brain training program, but use the right one. Not all apps are equal, and most are not well studied. One is. Researchers at McGill University's Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery found that 10 weeks of digital brain training restored a key brain function, specifically the system that governs learning and memory, to levels typically seen in someone 10 years younger. The lead researcher described it as the first intervention of any kind, drug or non-drug, ever shown to produce that result in humans, 10 years younger, in 10 weeks. The caveat matters. Digital training works best as a supplement to the other exercises on this list, not a replacement for them. The brain needs novel real-world experiences, social, physical, creative, that no screen fully replicates. But 20 minutes of structured cognitive training 3 or 4 times a week, layered on top of everything else here, is a meaningful addition. Exercise 9. Make something with your hands that you've never made before. Painting, drawing, woodworking, knitting a new pattern, cooking a recipe you've never attempted. Any creative activity that requires planning, sequencing, fine motor control, and real-time problem-solving engages the brain's executive systems in ways that passive consumption simply doesn't. The key word is new. The same knitting pattern you've done 50 times is a retrieval exercise. A pattern you've never tried is a construction exercise. The brain has to plan ahead, anticipate problems, correct errors in real time, and adjust. That loop, plan, execute, evaluate, adjust, is one of the most complete cognitive workouts available. And it produces something at the end, which matters for motivation in a way that puzzle apps don't. Start with something that requires a tutorial. The moment you need to learn before you can do, that's the window opening. Exercise 10. Teach something to someone else. The most counterintuitive item on this list, and possibly the most powerful. When you explain something you know to another person, truly explain it, from scratch to someone who doesn't yet understand, your brain is forced to retrieve, reorganize, and re-encode that information from the ground up. You have to find the gaps in your own understanding in order to bridge them for someone else. Researchers who study learning call this the protégé effect. The act of teaching consolidates the teacher's knowledge more durably than almost any other form of review. For you, the application is immediate. Teach a grandchild something you know how to do. Walk a neighbor through something you've learned. Explain a topic you care about, history, gardening, cooking, your profession, in plain language to someone who knows nothing about it. The social dimension makes it a dual exercise. The retrieval demand makes it one of the hardest things on this list in the best possible way. So, 10 exercises. And the same pattern runs through every one of them. Novelty, genuine challenge, the requirement to build something the brain hasn't built before. That's the active ingredient, not the specific activity, not the app or the instrument or the language. The state of being a genuine beginner at something real. Pick 2. The ones that felt most honest when you heard them. The ones where something in you said that's the one I've been avoiding. Start there. Be consistent for a month. And notice what happens, not just to your memory, but to your mood, your energy, your confidence in your own thinking. The brain you invest in today is the one that shows up for you 5 years from now. It is not too late. The capacity for change doesn't disappear with age. It just needs something genuinely worth changing for. Give it that. It will respond. Subscribe if this was useful. There's more content like this every week. Take care of yourself.